I think we are live, and sorry for the delay, um, but Astrology Night would not be complete without some sort of tech problem. And tonight we have a cable that is frayed. Somehow it just got broken. Um, so that's the way it is. Sam, can we get a little more volume on this mic, maybe? All right, just hang on one second. And for those of you online, can you hear me? Is someone type in the chat box whether or not you guys got this? Okay. Um, all right. And we will get started here again in just a moment. We have Sam on tech here and Gail off somewhere in online land handling chats. And thank you, Sam, and thank you, Gail. And that's a lot better. The mic now is good. You guys can hear me okay. I'm going to put this back in the holder. And I'd like to welcome everyone to Astrology Night, February 2025. It's pretty crazy out there, isn't it? Yeah. It's pretty crazy out there. And I don't think it's going to get uncrazy for a while, but the good news is it will get uncrazy, but not for a while. Tonight's agenda is a little bit, I want to say different, because it's always kind of reflective of what's going on these days. But for those of you who saw or watched I'm struggling here with microphones. Okay, for those of you who saw or watched the monthly, you know that the monthly was called Hall of Mirrors. And I thought it would be interesting to take a little bit of a deeper dive on that. And by the way, we're working tonight with only one camera that's on the computer. I say as I point to the computer, but there's an audience here. So for those of you who are online, if it looks like I'm not looking at you, I'm not. So I want to drill down a bit tonight on this concept of the Hall of Mirrors and talk a little bit about what's going on in the outer world. Of course, we know that the outer world and the inner world are one and the same. The grand illusion is that they are different. And yet when we look out there, we go, not me. And yet there's something here that has meaning for us. And it's difficult, I think, during these days to stay in touch with what's going on out there without being upset or freaked out or just like, what the hell is really happening on the planet? Now, it's important for me to state here very clearly that it's impossible to talk about what's going on out there without stepping into political realms. It's not the purpose of my talk tonight is not to be political. And from that standpoint, the social implications of what's going on politically become, how do I say this, non-political, because it's not about who you voted for. It's not about what party you belong to. It's not about what your view is on any one singular subject. The issue right now is way larger and way more complicated, and on some levels a lot more simple, because all of the apparent stretches, bifurcations, polarities are actually there for a reason, and that's what we're going to try to look at tonight a little bit. So I want to start off by sharing a poem written by a man named Drew Dellinger. Does anybody here know Drew Dellinger or know of his work? Anyone online, if you know Drew Dellinger? Um, Drew Dellinger is a PhD, I guess, sociologist. He's a poet. He's a social. He started an organization, a nonprofit called Planetize the Movement, and a very interesting guy. And the poem that I want to share with you, that I want to start off with, is called Hieroglyphic Stairway. And it goes like this. It's three, before I jump into it, for those of you who have never been to San Francisco, there's a rapid transit system there called BART, the Bay Area Rapid Transit. And on one of the lines heading south, San Mateo area, it goes to an area that's called Colma, Colma. The only reason I'm mentioning it is that this guy, Drew Dellinger, is a San Franciscan, and he references the Colma train. And so, just so that you're not confused when you hear it, it's a commuter train. And he's obviously going from San Francisco home late one night or early one morning. Hieroglyphic Stairway by Drew Dellinger. It's 3:23 in the morning and I'm awake because my great grandchildren won't let me sleep. My great grandchildren ask me in dreams, what did you do when the planet was plundered? What did you do when the earth was unraveling? Surely you did something when the seasons started failing, as the mammals, reptiles, and birds were all dying. Did you fill the streets with protest when democracy was stolen? By the way, this was written a good 10, 15 years ago. What did you do once you knew? I'm riding home on the Colma train. I've got the voice of the Milky Way in my dreams. I have teams of scientists feeding me data daily and pleading that I immediately turn it into poetry. I want this consciousness reached by people in range of secret frequencies contained in my speech. I am the desirous earth, equidistant to the underworld and to the flesh of the stars. I am everything already lost. The moment the universe turns transparent and all the light shoots through the cosmos, I use words to instigate silence. I am a hieroglyphic stairway in a buried Mayan city, suddenly exposed by a hurricane, a satellite circling Earth, finding dinosaur bones in the Gobi Desert. I am telescopes that see back in time. I am the precession of the equinoxes, the magnetism of the spiraling sea. I'm riding home on the Colma train with the voice of the Milky Way in my dreams. I am myths where violets blossom from blood like dying and rising gods. I am the boundary of time, soul encountering soul, and tongues of fire. It's 3:23 in the morning and I can't sleep because my great grandchildren ask me in dreams, what did you do when the earth was unraveling? I just want consciousness reached by people in range of secret frequencies contained in my speech. That's where we are. Good night. Time is a really, really, I want to go really, really weird, really, really weird thing. Some of you know that I have an apprentice program that I run online. And for the last couple of months, we've been having this open discussion about time. I mean, look, as an astrologer, my job is actually to help decipher or untangle the complexities or the mysteries of time. That's what astrology is. Astrology is a science or a study of time and of the cycles that are created within time. And of course, all time is created by cycles. If there weren't cycles, we wouldn't have time. In fact, time has been defined as the movement of something around a center. Because when it creates one circle or cycle, that's like one beat. And as something goes around that center point again and again, there's a continuity and a remembrance and a rhythm that's created, whether it's the cycle of day and night, or whether it's the cycle of the seasons, or whether it's the cycles of life and of birth and of coming of age and of living a life and then becoming old and then having a body decay and then actually leaving the plane of earth. These are all cycles, cycles of civilization, rises and falls, rising and falling of civilizations itself, all cycles. So what the hell is time? It's really crazy because physicists don't really know quite how to put it all together. In fact, it's been thought until very recently that time follows an arrow. In physics, they call it the arrow of time, which means that things go from the past into the present and into the future. And as things move into the future, they fall apart. They become more complex and unintegrated until something is reached that brings it to a steady state called entropy. This is an idea that has been in physics for hundreds of years, maybe longer. But it's now understood as we've peered into the microcosmic realms in quantum physics and into the subatomic realms that it's not quite that simple. It appears that time is actually moving in both directions. There is an entire branch of modern physics called retrocausality. I'm not making this up. Retrocausality is how the future impacts the present moment. And it's how the present moment impacts the past. And this is a rabbit hole that we could just kind of, claw our way into and try to figure out how they've actually proven with very, very carefully controlled experiments that a computer generating random numbers, just absolutely numbers being generated randomly should theoretically make about half even and half odd numbers, which they do reliably over time. And yet it's been shown that a person sitting in front of a computer can alter that number to a mathematically significant point where the computer is making more positive or more negative. Think of a coin flipping heads and tails, that the intention of someone sitting at a computer can actually alter the results, bend the results of the silicon generating those numbers. But here's where it gets crazy. This was, by the way, done at a PEAR, P-E-A-R, the Princeton Engineering Anomalies Research Center. It's a very, this is high mathematics, academically controlled work by a man named Robert John, J-A-H-N, if anyone wants to dig deeper and look at his work. A book of his is called Margins of Reality. But here's the thing that they did. They actually would have the computer run a minute or two of these hundreds of, or actually thousands of coin flips every second So they would generate these large sequences or series of numbers over the course of a few minutes. And then 3 days later, they would have someone sit in front of that computer and pick random cards that would show whether they should focus on odd or even numbers. And somehow, the numbers that were generated 3 days ago are bent according to what the person's thinking 3 days in the future. Now, I'm not here to explain this shit. Because as Niels Bohr, the guy who kind of delved into, created what we call quantum physics, said quantum physics isn't stranger than you think, it's stranger than you can think. And so what I'm trying to do here is just give us a sense that here we are at a moment in time. It's February 2025. We're coming off of a trajectory that, depending upon how long of a span we use, we may be coming off of a trajectory of 5 days of work, and now it's the weekend. We may be coming off of a trajectory of having had a crazy holiday season, and now we're kind of just getting into the next new year. We may be coming off of a trajectory where we were incredibly physically, politically involved in an election here in the United States, working for candidate A or candidate B and putting our whole life into that, and either being victorious or being totally devastated. We may also be working on a trajectory that we can't separate from what happened a few years ago, as the entire planet went into what might be looked at from an external point of view as a stroke, because all of a sudden, everything stopped for months, for almost a year and a half. And so that may be the trajectory that we feel that we're working on as we look at what's going on in February of 2025. As an astrologer, I look at trajectories a bit differently, because I look at all of those trajectories and I can tell my personal story by those data points in the past days, weeks, months. But I also, and I can go back to the January of 2020, when there was a once every 35, 38 year alignment of Saturn and Pluto that I've talked about many times here, and there's YouTube talks of mine on that cycle. But that 3 times a century alignment of Saturn and Pluto are markers in the history of the political and national and cultural events on the planet that are just shocking when you begin to realize how astrology isn't just about whether you're having a good day or a bad day, but in fact, major events through as far back in history as we can record seem to be timed precisely to these very slower moving rhythms that only happen, instead of once a month, which would be, a menstrual cycle, for example. But there are cycles that happen only once every 400 years. And when we track these cycles, we begin to see a whole different rhythm of repeatability. There's a great quote that is attributed to Mark Twain. Mark Twain? What the hell's that? That is attributable to Mark Twain. And many of you may recognize it. However, he didn't write it and he didn't say it. And that is, history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. It's a great line, but it's not Mark Twain's. So as an astrologer, I also look back to the 1960s, not only because I was coming of age in that period of time, but because there was an every other century alignment during the mid-60s that created both the political events, the consciousness changes, the romantic looking back at what happened or didn't happen during that time. And that was an alignment of the planets Uranus and Pluto. And so we can look at these various cycles. Because Earth is moving around the sun at the same time all the other planets are moving around the sun. And when I'm talking about what I'm going to be talking about, that's correctly stated, I will be talking about what sometimes we astrologers say are the real planets, meaning not the sun and the moon, because astrologers use the word planet in the sense of the Greeks planeta, which means wanderer. And so anything in the sky that moves in astrology is considered to be a planet, including the sun and the moon. So the real planets, meaning Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune. Yeah, we include Pluto. And she's up to 500,000 other things that NASA actually tracks going around the sun, which is why any astrologer who thinks they know it all doesn't know it all, because they're only looking at some of the bigger things. And, and there's a lot of things that are just beyond what we would be able to incorporate into our everyday discussions. But when it comes to Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, because they're moving around and the Earth is moving around, when Earth gets close to any of those planets, there's an optical illusion. For those of you who've been here before, you've heard me talk about this before. For those of you who have read anything about astrology online, you've come across the word retrograde. The planets don't move backwards, but it's that thing of, if you take your finger and put it close to your face and you look at it through two different eyes, the finger goes back and forth, in relationship to what's up there or out there. If you don't believe me, don't make me look like an idiot doing this here by myself. Do it. Put your finger there and look at what's behind it, and look one eye in the other, and the finger moves back and forth. Technical word for that is parallax. However, what happens is that when planets get closer to Earth, they do that weird thing of looking like they're going backwards, and that's retrograde motion. The most commonly talked about retrograde motion is Mercury. Why? Because Mercury moves faster than any of the other regular planets, and it goes retrograde 3 times a year. So it seems like every time you turn around, Mercury's ready to go retrograde, where other planets only go retrograde once a year. And because they're slower moving, you don't notice it as much. The image I like to use, and I kind of stole this from astronomer, astrologer Johannes Kepler. He didn't use the same example I'm going to use because he wrote about this in the late 1500s, but it's the same concept. And he was writing about why Mercury retrograde is so noticeable compared to, let's say, Saturn retrograde, which moves much slower. Here's the image. Imagine you're in a Porsche. He didn't have a Porsche in 1500. Actually, it was in the 1590s. So almost, he still didn't have a Porsche. Anyhow, imagine you're in a Porsche and you're going 70 miles an hour. You slam on the brakes and you throw it into reverse and you can accelerate. You would feel that, yeah? I mean, you could hopefully even just felt it as I talked about it. Now, imagine instead you're a passenger in an 18-wheeler, a large truck. And for those of you on the other side of the pond, a lorry, a big, big car with lots of weight, a truck. And imagine you're in a parking lot and you're just crawling along at maybe 1/4 mile an hour. You're just creeping forward slowly. And then the driver hits the brake and puts it into reverse. You might not even notice. Do you understand what it's the change of apparent speed from Earth's point of view that makes Mercury the fastest. When Mercury is moving fast from Earth's point of view, I mean, it moves relatively constantly. But from Earth's point of view, when it looks like it's going fast, it goes twice as fast as the sun. Meanwhile, in a matter of a few days, it screeches to a halt. It doesn't really, but it looks like it does. And then it starts moving backwards. That's why we notice Mercury retrogrades. but all the planets, all the real planets go retrograde. And so we are in a, I was, I have two thoughts going simultaneously, and my mouth doesn't understand how to say them both at the same time. We are at a point where we're in this whirlpool of a lot of planets having been moving direct, now turning retrograde, or having been going retrograde, now ready to turn direct. And for that reason, and this is like a one sentence summary of what we're going to dig into a little bit deeper as I continue this discussion, we're like in a whirlpool that doesn't know which way it's turning. Because normally the motion of the whirlpool is like this, but all of a sudden the planet comes in and starts stirring backwards, and we go, oh, okay. And then another one moves forward, and it's like standing in the ocean when the tide is coming up, tide's coming in, and all of a sudden though there's this big undertow that pulls you out, and it's like, wait a minute, this is confusing. Which way is the current going? And then at the same time, a riptide comes along from the side. It's like there's tides within tides within tides, because each and every planet is it's stirring its own stew, so to speak. So when a planet is retrograde, historically, traditionally in astrology, that's bad. I hate may be strong. It bothers me how much of astrology is even linguistically and conceptually based upon ancient life, where things were a whole lot clearer as to what was good and what was bad. I mean, what was good is if you had enough food for the next day, and if you had shelter, and if you had a little bit of warmth and everything, and you were going to live another day. What was bad was if you didn't. And life was often that simply, it was that potent. And so when things were flowing, easily, that was considered to be good. And for that reason, we have conditions in astrology that technically are called afflictions, which to the ancients mean that there's something wrong, that when you have two planets that are 90 degrees from one another, they're like pulling in different directions, and this is problematic. And yet we moderners come from a psychodynamic perspective, and we say, well, gee, without any conflict, there's no motion, there's no production, there's no movement forward. You need something to chew on in order for something to happen. So this idea of the retrograde historically is difficult because things do not move as they normally move forward. It feels like things are happening again. Because if you think about it, a planet is moving through this area of the sky, and then it looks like it's going back through that area again. And part of our mind says, gee, I just experienced that. I'm trying to go forward, and yet all these things are happening that are not letting me go forward. I thought I was done with that. I thought I scheduled that meeting. I thought we talked about this and had conclusions on all of this. And all of these things feel like and Nietzsche called it eternal recurrence. I mean, it's not quite eternal in this case, but as things happen again. But then when the planet turns direct, it's going through that exact same period, that exact same area of the sky. And it's like, now I'm moving forward. We feel it. But I'm moving forward through places I've already been. This isn't new. And so we often get things astrologically once when the planet moves direct through an area. Then as it turns retrograde, we get it again. And then as it turns direct, we get it a third and final time. And so often planets will go forward. I'm going to face the camera here. They go forward and then backward over that same space, and then forward. And then they may go backward again, but not reach that same space. And so there are these areas in space where things happen not once, but 3 times. It's the proverbial 3 strikes and you're out kind of a concept, or things do happen in threes. When 2 things happen, there's often a third thing that follows because of this natural rhythm of direct, retrograde, direct. The problem is often that we live in this idea that time is an arrow and is moving forward, and it should always be moving forward at the same rate and at the same, with and so when we meet an obstacle and have to do something again, we feel like we're doing something wrong. We're feeling like we've met a defeat. We're feeling like this is not okay. And often we then get so overstimulated, over anxious, over confused that we make decisions that are, how to say this, stupid. Because it's like we're driving down a freeway and there's a traffic jam, and we realize that we have less fuel in our tank than we thought we did, and we decide, oh my God, I got to get off the freeway. And you get off these lanes, and then you get off, and you finally get off, and you realize I'm driving in the middle of Chicago or Los Angeles, and I think I'm getting off to get gas, and I find myself on another 4-lane freeway, and I don't know where I'm going now. And so what happens is, often when planets are retrograde, under duress, we make decisions that we think we need to make right now. And we don't realize that the illusion of time is being warped into tricking us to thinking the urgency is such that if we don't take action in the moment, that we will lose the opportunity to do that. Now, there's something else that happens that the ancients didn't quite get, and they didn't talk about, and that is that planets are like radio stations making hums, making frequencies. All the planets are moving around. And so Mercury has its, its frequency, and Venus has, and every planet has its own little frequency. When a planet gets closer to Earth, it's like the radio station is louder. If you have like an old AM radio, and there's a 50,000 watt station in your backyard, you're not going to get any other stations, because no matter where you tune, it's going to come in on every frequency. It's so damn strong. And so if you got a planet that's louder than it should be, than it typically is, it's like, how do you integrate that? The example I like to use is using Mercury, because Mercury is how we think. Mercury is how we send and receive information. Mercury as the messenger of the gods. Mercury, the psychopomp, it's the guide between worlds, between this world and the unconscious or other worlds, the hell realms even. And so Mercury is really how language is used to navigate this emptiness, this abyss between me and you, between any two people. And Mercury as communication, we take for granted because we have such a high level of use of language spoken and written and even symbols and so on. But let's say that you were a young woman living in Greece, rural Greece, 300, 500 years ago, for that matter, probably even 50 years ago, or even today in some places. Or let's say you were living in Italy, and the whole world was buzzing around you because of the Renaissance and everything was happening, but you were a woman, and therefore you weren't allowed to read or write, because that was something that only guys got to do. And let's say that your Mercury was really loud, meaning you were born with retrograde Mercury, and therefore your Mercury is like just working all the time, and you're seeing your brothers studying Greek and Latin and reading these books, and that would make you crazy. And in fact, it did. And it was very difficult in older periods of time where the external world was somewhat one-dimensional. There was just you basically plugged into it where you were. There was no such thing as human growth, or human potential, or greater awareness. It was like you did what you were supposed to do, and then you hopefully had enough food, you slept, and you woke up the next day and you did it again. I mean, that's what life was. And so retrograde planets typically have this problematic attachment to them, but they're often, the problem is, how do we integrate the louder, the greater intensity, the more power that planet may bring, whether it's Mercury bringing, more mental action and thoughts that may not have a place to plug into outside, or whether it's Venus, which is your attractions and your desires, and Venus retrograde. These energies are very powerful, and yet again, it's hard to find a way to integrate them. Or Mars retrograde, which might end up giving someone or relating to someone who has anger or rage that has no way out, because the energy is just stronger than it may be for another person. It's about the level of volume and how we integrate it. Or Jupiter retrograde, because Jupiter is about growth. It's about travel. It's about expanding our mind. And with a retrograde Jupiter, we're not just moving into new territory, we're actually going inward and down and deeper maybe. And so there's all of these energies are a little bit different than they would be normally. Saturn, the planet having to do with authority and external structure. And someone born with Saturn retrograde may have issues either with authority or have a lack of authority in their early life. It's often said that people with Saturn retrograde tend, and this isn't a one-to-one correspondence, but tend to lack a father figure to project their sense of authority and structure on, whether dad bailed or whether dad was emotionally unavailable or whatever it is. And again, it doesn't mean that every chart has way more in it than you can get from these kinds of vast generalizations. So here we are in February of 2025. And in February of 2025, we are at very much a turning point, because we are at the tail end of a Mars retrograde, and we are at the almost beginning of a Venus retrograde. Now, Venus and Mars don't go retrograde 3 times a year. In fact, they go retrograde less common than even all the other outer planets. They have weird retrograde cycles. Mars goes retrograde for about 10 weeks, I think, every other year. Venus goes retrograde about every year and a half, I think for about 40 days, I think, in that range, which may be the origin of the 40 days and 40 nights of many different religious traditions. But at the same time, we also are just coming off of Jupiter's retrograde and Uranus's retrograde. Now, here's the thing. The outer planets typically are retrograde once a year. I say typically, they are always. Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto are always, they go retrograde once a year. And they do it when they get closest to the Earth, which means that they are on the same side of the sun as the Earth is. So if you look at my computer, for those of you who are out there in internet land, the computer is now the sun, and I am some outer planet. And here, the microphone that I'm holding is coming between, this is Earth, coming between the sun and the outer planet. Now, what that means is that if you're on Earth, when the outer planet is close to you, it's opposite the sun. And that means that anyone who's born with Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, or Pluto, opposite or near opposition to the sun, has that planet retrograde. because even though it's opposite the sun on the chart, it's actually as close to the Earth as it can get. It's kind of a weird way of looking at it. But here's the deal, and that is that when a planet is in opposition to the sun, the outer planets, that's when the signal is really loud. And so we're coming off of both Jupiter and Uranus having gone retrograde. And the thing here is that when planets change from going direct to retrograde, just like a pendulum on a clock, the pendulum on a clock, again, I'm going to face the camera here, for the pendulum on the clock does not go the same speed all the way through. It goes fastest here at the bottom, and as it gets to either side, it slows down until it stops. And then it starts again very slowly, and by the bottom, it's going really fast, and then it slows down and stops again. And so planets, as they change from retrograde to direct, really move slowly. Now, when a planet moves slowly, it's like that Mack truck, that 18-wheeler. It has power, not speed, but it has inertia. It has power. And so we are at a point, for example, where Jupiter is just turned direct. And let me just get my dates in front of me here so I don't mislead us. So we have Jupiter, which turned direct on February 4th, and Uranus, which turned direct on January 30th. Those planets, because they're outer planets and they already move slowly, barely move over weeks at a time. It's like being frozen in time. It's like everything else moves against it instead of it moving against everything else. It's like a change of perspective. And yet what's happened is that as these outer planets turned retrograde last year, and one at a time they began moving direct. Pluto turned direct just before Election Day, actually mid-October of 2024. And then Saturn turned direct in mid-November. But then by December 1st, Mars turned retrograde. Now, by December 6th, I'm sorry, not the 1st. Now, here's why this Mars retrograde thing is so important to understand what's going on in the world out there, is that, remember, when those planets go direct, then retrograde, and then direct, if there's another planet in that spot that is a slower moving planet or a planet somewhere else, that means that the planet that's going direct, retrograde, and direct is going to line up with that planet once, then twice, and then 3 times. If you have a planet in your chart that a planet retrogrades over, that means that there's going to be a 1, 2, 3 prong event scenario in your life where, let's say, Saturn is moving. Right now, Saturn is moving through mid-Pisces. So if you have a planet in your chart, for example, in mid-Pisces, or for that matter, opposite it in mid-Virgo, or 90 degrees to it in mid-Gemini or mid-Sagittarius, what that means is that Saturn in the sky over these past months has gone over that planet in your chart, creating constriction and weight and seriousness. And then it retrograded over that same place again, and we could actually astrologically get the exact dates for this. And whatever that event was last October or November, come January, all of a sudden it may have been like, gee, this thing is still in process, but things have changed. It's not quite the same as it was. And now that Saturn has turned direct, there'll be a third and final time when Saturn makes that exact same aspect. So this is about personal astrology. But when it comes to national politics or national astrology, one of the scenarios that we are still in the midst of is the fact that Mars actually last November, let me think, 2 days prior to the presidential election in the United States, Mars, still moving direct at that point in time, lined up exactly opposite Pluto. Now, Mars is the planet of war. Mars is the planet of creating boundaries, healthy or unhealthy boundaries. Mars is a difficult planet because it's hot and it can get excited, and therefore it can get too hot. It can be assertion can become aggression in effect. But Mars was opposite Pluto, meaning that there was like a tug of war between the fiery boundary setting of Mars and Pluto, which is the lord of the underworld. And underworld here doesn't just mean the Judeo-Christian hell where we go to get punished. It means everything that's not on the surface, everything that's hidden, everything that's underground. In fact, the word plutocracy is a government of the very, very, very wealthy, but wealth that's hidden, meaning it's not about a lot of money. It's about the people who own the petroleum, the gold mines, the silver mines, the diamond mines, the copper, the tin. That's where the real wealth is in these hidden resources. In modern psychology, the underworld is in fact the unconscious. It's everything that is hidden from this plane. So when Mars is opposite Pluto, there's this incredible tug of war between this need to set boundaries and the stuff that's coming up from the underworld that is kind of in our face. And that was exact within a couple of days of the presidential election. It was exact on November 3rd. Then Mars turned retrograde, and that exact opposition was again on January 2nd. And in fact, it's still in play because these things they're not just single dates. But again, there's this whole getting ready for whatever the change was that was going to occur around presidential inauguration here in the United States. And so we had Mars opposite Pluto for the second time. And we're still in the throes of that energy, even as we speak now at the beginning of February. But here's the thing to understand, and that is that Mars turns direct on February 23rd, which means that although Mars was going backwards, looks like it's been slowing down already, because in a couple of weeks it will make its change of direction, and therefore Mars is barely moving in the sky. It's holding a lot of energy. And when it begins to move forward and begins to pick up speed, it's going to move opposite to Pluto for the third and final time on April 27th. Okay, so we need to pin that date on our little calendar reminders, because somehow the events around Election Day passed in the United States, and the election and the events around the beginning of this year are not really going to be clear as to what they really mean, as to how it really plays out, until we begin to get some separation from whatever happens or doesn't happen around April 27th. So this is just one of several cycles that's going on right now, but I'm using it as an example to help us see that what's happening out there right now is that infinite regression that occurs when you're in a hall of mirrors and you don't know where the original event was, because things now are reflecting back and back and back and back again. I do want to talk about a couple of other specific aspects that are unfolding, like right now, or let me say that we're in the middle of, because it feels like some of these are done deals. And all I can say is that astrologically, the amount of stress and pressure and change that we're seeing, and again, I don't care what your individual politics are. And I don't care if you think that things needed a huge amount of change. Look, I mean, it's hard for me not to step into this territory even a little bit, but it's not about whether this policy or that policy is the right policy. It's about the entire foundation of the United States being ripped away right now. And I'm not sure that it's not a healthy thing, as horrible as it feels and as bad as the collateral damage is. And in no way am I behind some of the specific policies. I don't know if anyone saw the current cover. I'm going to put this up. I think I can do this online here, just because this kind of says it all. Just bear with me here a quick second. This is, I think you can see it even here. This is the cover of Time magazine, and it is Elon Musk sitting behind the presidential desk. This is a person who basically bought an election and is running our government. I don't care whether you agree with him individually or not, or whatever his policies are or not. That's not the point that I'm making here. I'm making a point right now that there's something else going on that feels so overwhelming to so many people that it's really easy to go quiet. And I'm here to suggest that going quiet is the worst thing that we can do. And again, I have very particular perspectives and points of views on a lot of individual issues. And I hope you do too. And I don't care if yours are different than mine, but this is not the time to shut up. This is not the time to just feel overwhelmed and say, oh, I'm done because it's all over. Astrologically, it's not over. In fact, astrologically, we are in a time of huge flux. The Mars retrograde is only one of several different things going on right now. Again, I'll bring up one or two others, but it's more than I can cover in even just a short evening without going weirdly, astrotech on you, which I won't do. Let me get this. I guess this. Oh, it's gone. Thank you, Gail or Sam, whoever did it. Thank you. The thing here is that, and some of you have heard, I think last month I spent some time on this. I will again next month. But as we move into through the middle of 2025 into 2026 and 2027, there is more astrological change than any astrologer alive has ever seen. And I kind of have prided myself over the years of being a bit of an astro minimalist. I'm the one where everyone's saying, oh, this is the most amazing full moon eclipse ever and blah, 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 blah. And I'm going, yeah, well, Monday, chop wood, carry water. Tuesday, chop wood, carry water. The eclipse is on Wednesday. Thursday, we're still chopping wood and carrying water. Things have a tendency of going on through whatever levels of fearful apocalyptic ramblings, astro ramblings, we might place on events. I'm not saying that this is apocalyptic, although from a larger geological perspective, something way bigger than what we think is going on is going on. But it's important to understand that astrologically, the level of flux right now, there's a part of me that just can't not say it's all flux stuff. And I'm not going to say it because I don't lack willpower, I just lack won't power. Anyhow, this flux will seem overwhelming, and then it's going to settle down. And when it settles down, whether we like what it settles down into or not, this is going to be what we're going to have for a while. And when I say for a while, whether it's 1 or 2 presidential cycles here in the United States, whether it's 3 years, 5 years, a decade, I don't know, but it's not going to be, things are not going to be as easy to change in a year or three as they are now, even though right now it may feel like things are unchangeable. And again, whether it's medical sovereignty, and when I say medical sovereignty, I'm not only referring to, the right of a woman to not have a politician between her legs. That sounds all wrong. To not have politicians making decisions that they shouldn't be. But I also mean the medical sovereignty of not having to be controlled by a medical system that says this is the way you have to be treated for this, whether or not it's something that is part of your way of dealing with whatever conditions or illnesses are. It's a lot more complicated than the political polarity, because you have people on one side of that issue when it's with respect to abortion, and then another side of that issue when it's with respect to pharmaceutical control of our lives. And again, I'm not digging any deeper onto this. I'm only pointing this out as part of the complexity of not only February, and it's at a heightened intensity in February because we're seeing appointments made to a new administration that are going to set some of these pieces in place. And we may be surprised at the things that we thought were the worst may not be, and the things that we thought were okay may be way bit worse than we even thought. And so I'm not being either a Pollyanna about this, nor am I being totally defeated, although it's easy to feel defeated when you see when you feel like it's 3:23 in the morning and your great grandchildren are saying, what did you do, when the earth was being plundered. So coming back to the astrology of now, and I hope that wasn't too far afield, but I think it's really important to keep this in perspective, because, and some of you have maybe heard, what was that, George? Oh, in a way, the image that I've been using in my astrology classes is what happens when you mix copper and tin. Copper is malleable. It's a soft metal. It's very beautiful, pliable, but it's not really useful because it's bendable. So it's so malleable. Tin is also malleable, but it's so brittle that it breaks. But if you melt copper and tin together, as they cure, they create what's called an alloy. They create bronze. And once something is cured as bronze, it ain't copper and it ain't tin and it ain't gonna break. The discovery of bronze was important enough that it created an entire age, the Bronze Age. But the thing is, right now, our world is still copper and tin. And it feels like it's solidifying pretty quickly, but it's not solidifying as quickly as it might seem. But the factor in here that is the change factor is what each and every one of us does in our daily lives, in our political lives, in our interactive lives. It's easy to get discouraged and just roll over and say, nothing's going on, I'm done. I want to talk about one other planetary cycle, though, just to give you a sense, and that's Venus, because Venus has been absolutely gorgeous in the night sky. And if you haven't seen it in the night sky, you still have a week or so to see it at its brightest. And that is when the sun goes down in the direction of the sun. There's this thing that's brighter than anything else up there. And it's not a weather balloon and it's not a drone. It's it is Venus. But over the weeks ahead, Venus is already beginning to slow down, and Venus turns retrograde on March 1st. The reason why, and Venus stays retrograde for about 40 days. It turns direct on April 12th. April 12th. And incidentally, in that same period of time, Mercury turns retrograde mid-March on the 14th and turns direct on April 7th. Now, what this means astrologically is that come April, when Mercury turns direct, Venus turns direct, Jupiter, which has already turned direct, is now gaining some speed. Mars, which has turned direct, Mars turns direct on February 23rd, is now moving closer to that third and final opposition to Pluto. By the time we get to May, we're going to be going, what the hell happened? Because it won't be here. I mean, we may be here physically, but we're going to be at the beginnings of what's around the corner, which is still on the launch pad because of the changes of the slower moving outer planets by sign. I'm going to come back to that in just a moment, but I want to talk about Venus just a moment more here, because Venus right now is setting up specific events that when she turns retrograde through March and into early April, she'll be revisiting those events. And then as she turns direct in mid-April, even though it'll feel like we're moving forward, both Mercury and Venus will be moving forward through territory we've already been through. And so we may be by May and early June say, is there any way out of this? Bob Dylan's, what's that song? Must be some way out of here, said the Joker to the thief. You know, or stuck inside of Mobile with the Memphis Blues again. I got Bob on my mind. But there's this sense that it's going to take a while for us to get through this. And the Venus piece in this is going to be also very important. I have more on dates on this on my monthly, where I drill down on the charts a bit more. But I do want to say one other thing here. That is separate from these retrograde motions. Well, no, it's actually part of it, because as the outer planets go retrograde, in particular, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, occasionally they will do that as they're changing signs. And that's the other piece of what's going on in 2023, 24, 25, 26, is that Pluto, and many of us who have been following astrology know that Pluto is returned to the sign of Aquarius for the first time since the American and French revolutions, since the creation of the American judicial system, since the first Continental Congress, since the first meetings of the first Congress, convening of the American Congress, and that Pluto, as the lord of the underworld, that whole what's the word I'm looking for? Deconstruction. Often Pluto is associated with death, but it's not physical death. It's the deconstruction, almost like nihilism, and then the reconstruction of something new. And in fact, just like we celebrate a birthday every year, the United States is celebrating its first Pluto birthday over these years, because Pluto has made one complete 248-year cycle around the sky since the United States was created. So we have Pluto that's been dancing from Capricorn into Aquarius, retrograded back into Capricorn, and then direct back into Aquarius. But because Pluto moves so slowly, it then tipped back into Capricorn just for a little bit, and then it moved direct, and it's now in Aquarius. But it's moving really slowly because Pluto always moves really slowly. So Pluto, even now, and I think as I'm talking here, I think I'll pop up a chart of where the planets are now. I think I can do this by, all right, Sam, I might need, add to stage. Did that do it? Are we there? All right. So we have a lot of lines in the middle. Don't pay any attention to them. We will later. But you can see here how Mars at 1 degree of Leo is opposite Pluto at 1 degree of Aquarius.
You can open up the full window on here and it'll still show that image on the screen. Well, that works too.
Is that a little better? So Mars here opposite Pluto at 1 degree of Aquarius. There's 2 arrows. I'm not sure which arrow you're getting.
You can just go to the page, like in the tab. You know what I'm saying? Yeah, just go to Solar Tide.
All right. Gee, thanks, Sam. All right. So this is actually a chart for January 1st. And you can see on January 1st that Mars was exactly same degree, 1 degree of Leo, opposite Pluto at 1 degree of Aquarius. Okay, let's move this now. I think this will work. Okay, so here we are today, and Mars has retrograded back away from.
You got to share your screen again.
Bear with us here online. I have to share screen again. Settings, present, share screen, and window, and animated screen, and that will work. Okay. Good. Okay. So we can see here now that since the beginning of the year, Pluto has moved 1 degree over the month from 1 degree to 2 degrees of Aquarius. But here's the other significant things. We have Saturn that's turned direct, that over the months ahead, Saturn's going to whiz all the way through the rest of Pisces. It's at 18 degrees of Pisces, and it's going to go into Aries. We have Neptune right now at 28 degrees of Pisces. That's like the next to last degree. And over the next couple of months, it's going to move from Pisces into Aries. And it will do that on March 30th is when Neptune will move into Aries. We also have Uranus at 23 degrees of Taurus, but it's already back as far as it's going to go because it just went retrograde, and it's like a slingshot now. It's moving really, really slowly, but as it picks up speed, I'm going to move this ahead a week at a time in a moment. You'll see all these planets. In particular, we're going to be looking at Pluto, which won't move very fast because it doesn't move very fast even when it's moving fast. Neptune, which is going to move into Aries. Saturn, which is going to move into Aries. Uranus, which is going to move from Taurus into Gemini. And they're all going to do it making harmonious relationships with one another. And on top of that, they're going to all do it, except for Pluto, which is firmly in Aquarius now. The other 3, Saturn, Neptune, and Uranus, are all going to change signs, back up again, and then change signs again. So they're going to move from Pisces to Aries, back into Pisces, and then back into Aries. That would be Saturn and Neptune. And Uranus is going to move from Taurus into Gemini, back into Taurus, and then back into Gemini. And this process is going to take almost 2 years for it to complete. In the meantime, we got all those faster moving planets moving backward and forward and backward and forward and backward and forward, which is why we're stuck in this hall of mirrors. I'm going to change this chart so that we're only seeing the outermost planets because it'll really help you see this really easily. And what we're going to do here is I'm only going to show Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. And all the other planets are going to go away. So, and I'm going to get rid of these. I'll leave the lines in the middle. Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain or the lines in the middle. Okay. So, this is the beginning of February. I'm going to move this ahead 1 week at a time. And in particular, I want you to first watch Neptune and also watch how fast Saturn gains on Neptune, because Saturn and Neptune align about every 40 years, 40, 45 years, but they've never done it within recorded history at 0 degrees of Aries, which is, in astrology, that is the key point. That's the point that starts everything. 0 degrees of Aries is like a circle really has no beginning and no ending. But astrology says the beginning occurs every year at the moment of the spring equinox. When a planet reaches 0 degrees Aries, it's like the end of one cycle and the beginning of the other, the beginning of the next. Well, Neptune takes 165 years to go around once, so it moves from Pisces to Aries every 165 years. Saturn goes around every 30 years, 29 and a half actually. So it catches up to Neptune about every 40 years or so. But the fact that they're doing it at 0 degrees of Aries is, no one's ever seen it. We can't say what's going to happen, but we can certainly look at what happens when Saturn lines up with Neptune. And there's a whole deep dive on that we'll do next month or the month after, because their first alignment, their exact alignment, happens a year from now. But over the summer, they get so close together that they might as well be joined, but they're just minutes of arc apart. So we want to watch Saturn and Neptune, and we're going to also watch Uranus and Jupiter's moving a little faster, but we'll watch it also because it changes signs every year. But I'm going to move this ahead a week. Saturn's moved a degree from 18 to 19. Another week, another week, another week, another week. You can see that Neptune is now at 29 degrees and 41 minutes. Minutes are like minutes on a clock. 60 minutes in an hour, 60 minutes in a degree. Neptune is almost at 0 degrees of Aries. Look how fast Uranus has moved. Uranus spent 7 years in each sign, but right now it is ready to blast out of Taurus. And we move this ahead, and by March 30th, boom, there's Neptune at Aries. We see that? That's the first of these outer planet shifts. But as Neptune moves into Aries, it's picking up also on the energy of Pluto in Aquarius, because Aries and Aquarius are signs that are sextile. They're called the same polarity. They are air and fire. Fire and air work together like water and earth do. Let's move this ahead again a few weeks at a time. And now we can see Saturn is gaining. It's now at 28 degrees. Now we're in May, and May right there at the end of May, we now have Saturn and Neptune in Aries. And we have Uranus at the next to last degree of Taurus. And so we move this ahead another week at a time. Oh, right in here at the very end of May, beginning of June, Jupiter moves from Gemini into Cancer. But watch Uranus, there's at 29 degrees. We're looking at Uranus down there. And right there in July, we now have an entirely new world of outer planets. And when planets change signs, it's like they get dressed up in different costumes, or they get, it's like what you would wear to go to work on a Monday morning if you worked at an investment firm versus going out clubbing on a Saturday night. It's the same you, but your whole presentation and what you do with your energy is in a way a different presentation. And so this whole shift of energy is the background of why everything feels so out of whack now, because even though that's going to be the way it is by midsummer, I'm going to move this ahead a month at a time now, because what I want you to see is each of these planets, with the exception of Pluto, are all going to retrograde back into the previous signs, saying, whoop, we're not done yet. We got some cleanup to do. So watch as we move this forward. There's Saturn back into Pisces. There's Neptune back into Pisces. And there's Uranus back into Taurus. We move it forward again. Excuse me. And by next May, Saturn and Neptune, it's actually really by February. Saturn and Neptune make that exact conjunction in Aries. Uranus moves from Taurus back into Gemini, and they will not back up into the previous signs. So by 2026, we are in new ground. Now, just from a political standpoint, it's important to remember that in 2026, in November, we have elections in the United States. And there, in many ways, is going to be the brunt of what happens as the alloy begins to solidify. And that's why it's so important that wherever we fall on these issues, that we don't go quiet. Are you with me here? This makes sense to you guys? There's a little different approach than we normally take, because I really wanted everyone to get a sense of not just the bigger picture, but how this back and forthness really creates this sense of what's going on right now. And whatever it is that's going on right now it's important, and it's uncomfortable, probably no matter. I mean, I know there are people who are giddy with what's happening right now. I mean, I get it. But they too, unfortunately, are going to face the realization that it's not going to unfold the way they thought it was going to unfold. Just like many of us may feel like we see how bad it's going to unfold, but it may be in some ways that there's some larger scenario going on here that has to do with a wake-up call. You know, it's in some ways, on some crazy level, it's like the government that we had that looked like the better of the two choices for many people might have been like the frog boiling in the water that didn't know the environment was changing, because on a larger scheme here, and I've said this before, we are at the tail end of a very large trajectory that's not 10 years or back to the 60s or even back to the Industrial Revolution. We're looking at this changing of ages that's a 2,100-year cycle, that the age of Aquarius will begin in about 100 years. And so we're getting early warnings. We are not there yet. I mean, there are changes ahead of us, regardless of what you, let me unshare my screen here. Can you stop the share on the screen? Thank you. We are at a point in history that whether you are for or against artificial intelligence, or for or against augmented reality, or for or against ET or disclosure, or what you think about any of these things, doesn't matter. It doesn't matter, because there is a larger trajectory here at play. And yes, we can guide that trajectory, and it's very, very important that we do. But it's like going back 2,000 years ago and trying to plot someone from that life into this life and have them think that these are humans, that we are human, because our humanness has very little, maybe nothing, to do with what a human was 2,000 years ago. So from this standpoint, the changes that are occurring are going to be occurring very, very fast. And it's important that we pay attention to them, because you know that saying, go with the flow. Well, it's been said to me by a number of people that only dead fish go with the flow. And there's something there, because the flow can be so strong that you can't go against it. But live fish, Pisces fish, have tails and fins, and they navigate through that flow. And it's important that we find ways to navigate through this time because what's going on out there is that two things. One, we're either all going to make it or none of us are going to make it. It's that simple. It's island consciousness. It's too small of a dust mote in the universe, the Earth I'm talking about, that we're either going to all make it together or we're not going to make it at all. But here's the thing, and that is that when it comes to these larger changes, the things that are going to go are colonialism, imperialism, capitalism, patriarchy. These are things that are going to fall away. And if you had lived a few hundred years ago, the idea that there could be a government without a king or queen was just unconscionable. You couldn't, it was impossible to even imagine. And that's why it's impossible to imagine what's around this bend, because this bend is that great. So in closing, it's don't let them get you discouraged. For a lot of people, it's going to suck. For a lot of people, it's going to suck even worse. But let's just keep in mind that we live in a world, we here online live in a world where it's easy to forget how bad it's been sucking for people already. It's the, this is going to sound all wrong again. I can't figure out a good way to say this. The sucking center of the universe is shifting. No, but here's the thing. If you live in Sudan, if you live in Palestine, if you live in Iraq, if you live in Iran, if you live in so many places in South America that have been colonialized by the Spanish, by the Americans, all over the world, it's easy to forget what marginalized living is and what it's like. And right now it's coming closer to home, unquestionably. And it's not going to be fun for a lot of people, and a lot of people who are, some of them are us, and some of them are people we know personally. Some of them are brothers and sisters and parents and children, and it's going to suck. On the other hand, it's been sucking for a lot of other people already. And that's not a justification that any of this is okay, but we need to keep paying attention to what's going on, and we need to look for inflection points. The site that I was given today, and Gail, if I don't get this right, if you would post it, is it fivevoices.org? Fivecalls.org. Doesn't matter what your interest or your political leanings are. You can sign all the documents you want online. You can sign all of the petitions. They probably don't matter much, but making telephone calls does. It does, because they get registered, and those numbers are numbers that drive politics. So, Gail, if you're there, would you post a little banner on that, just with that address? That would be great. Beyond that, hang in there, keep breathing. It's going to change, and it's not necessarily going to always change for the better right now for many people. But there is a huge curve that we are on, and we cannot see around it, just like the caterpillar cannot see the butterfly. We are on a ride, and best blessings to all of us. It's posted on fivecalls.org. Thank you. Thank you for putting it there, Gail, or Sam, or whoever did. Gail. Sam just said Gail. Okay, so we're going to take a 10-minute break. We're going to come back, and we're going to do a couple of charts. For those of you who are bored or had enough astrology for an evening, this is your chance to slip off into the sunset. For those of you who want to stay, and if you want your chart to possibly be looked at, these things will be on the table here. There'll be a hat on this table right here. Fill out your name, your birth date, place, time. I want your email address. And by the way, if you're not on my email list and want to be, fill out one of these. Just leave off your birth time if you don't want your chart looked at. I can promise you, you'll never be deluged with marketing emails from me, but you will get an occasional email and certainly notification of when Soul Food is either here or not here. And Makia, we haven't talked about next month. Well, I'm going to be gone the first Friday night of the month, but I'm going to be here the last Friday night of the month. And if you wanted to do that, I might be able to be talked into it. And if that doesn't work, I'll go, okay, see you the month after.
It's open right now.
All right, so here's the deal. Everyone should stay in touch. We'll let you know online whether or not we're doing this on the 31st or whether we're skipping March.
Yeah, don't do it.
All right, all right, it's all right. Then it's official. We will meet. The March event will be on the last Friday night of February. What is it? It's Friday the 28th.
Yeah.
Friday the 28th here. We'll see you all here. And again, if you want your chart looked at, we'll draw 2 or 3 charts and we'll do short analysis of them. You'll see how this works in real time. And on break, by the time we end, that bar will be shut down. So if you want something, get it now. Also, as I do the same talk every month, you don't only vote at the voting box, you also vote by how you spend your money. And if you have a birthday coming up for someone or some event or something and you need to get something, instead of buying it on Amazon or the box store down the block and around the corner, there's a lot of really cool shit here. Look at it and spend some money, because that's what keeps this place going so we can do events like this. And thank you all for coming, and I'll see some of you after break in about 10 minutes. And with that, I'm going to put my mic on mute, and I'm going.
It's not the other.
All right, greetings all. We are back and we are looking at a picture of Earth that was taken last week from a spaceship on its way to the moon. Oh, disappeared.
Make sure to grab the
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Okay. We are post intermission. And we are looking at a photo that was taken last week from a vehicle on its way to the moon. And this is the home dust mote, or that we call planet Earth. And let's make that go away. And I'm going to share my screen again. And we have 3 charts that we're going to do. These are going to be short looks at each of the chart so that everyone can get a sense of how this all works. Excuse me. And all right, I'm going to pick a couple of charts. First chart. You must be present to win. Robert, July 9th. Robert, I don't suppose I could talk you into going there, so I don't have to have my back to the camera when I'm looking at you. Is that okay? Robert, all right, and I'm going to set the microphone down for a second. I've got microphone wire issues going on here. Okay. I'm going to enter Robert's data. So I'm going to share my screen. And you guys should be seeing my solar fire screen. It's not very focused, is it? Okay, so that's about as good as we're gonna get. Okay. And we're going to enter Robert's data. And that is July 9th, 1965. July 9th, 65 at 10:16 a.m. in Vallejo, California. Okay, Robert, do you know your chart? Have you had your chart done before? What's your astrology story?
I'm sort of a 1 out of 10, maybe. Pretty low. I know what it is, but
Okay. And we're still looking at only the outermost planets, so which deprives you of your entire personal existence. So we're going to now add a whole bunch of extra points. And what we are looking at here, actually, I also want to change hold on one second. Okay, so we are now looking at Robert's chart, born July 9th, 1965 at 10:16 in the morning in Vallejo, California. And when we look at this chart, we can see if we look off to the far left that there's 9 degrees Virgo rising, which means that there's a Virgo rising with Uranus and Pluto coming together, because Uranus and Pluto were actually aligned later in the summer of 1965. When I look at Robert's chart, the first thing, aside from seeing the Uranus-Pluto rising, which makes me believe that Robert is wired into some sort of social, cultural something out there. You know, there are those people who lived through the 60s, and then there are those people who are younger who wish they lived through the 60s or remember them. And then there are the people born in the 60s that have some aspect of the 60s living through them. There's some connection here with, going deep. Pluto, that's the 14 degrees rising, and Uranus, the eccentric or the different or the new, the innovative. But when I look at Robert's chart, I see something else incredibly powerful and strong. I see the technical word here is it's a partile grand water trine. I'll break that down. In astrology, the word partile is used when there are two planets that have the same degree number, even though they're in different signs. A trine or grand trine is when a trine is like, if you think of an equilateral triangle, that's a grand trine. A trine is 1/3 of a circle or 120 degrees. In astrology, two planets are trine if they're in the same element, like a planet in Aries is trine a planet in Sagittarius or Leo because they're all fire, same element. A planet in Taurus is trine to a planet in Virgo or Capricorn because they're all earth, same element. A planet in Gemini is trine to a planet in Aquarius or Libra because they're all in air, same element. Well, Robert has the sun at 17 degrees of Cancer, that's water, a planet at 17 degrees of Scorpio, that's water, and a planet at 17 degrees of Pisces, that's water. That's a grand water trine, partile because they're all 17 degrees. Do you understand? So it's just a technical term. It's a partile grand water trine. Now, what does that mean? Well, Buckminster Fuller has clearly shown us that triangles are the only stable form of nature, that nature uses triangles to stabilize energy. And so even a builder making a house has to triangulate, the 90-degree angles to take the stress off the 90-degree angle to make them stabilized. So Robert has the sun, Neptune, and Saturn all in water signs, all harmonizing, flowing energy with one another. To me, it's like a closed circuit television that's playing Robert's emotions, meaning that there's a self-sufficiency, which in ancient astrology was looked at as the ultimate blessing. If you had a grand trine in your chart, man, you rocked it because there was a form of stability, a sense of inner, I'm okay, even if my life isn't okay. If it was a grand fire trine, it was like you always knew what to do, what to burn, how to act. If it was a grand air trine, you always knew what to think. It was like it didn't matter what was going on out there. You could go home, turn on your TV in your room, your closed circuit TV of your mind, and it was playing your thoughts. I'm comfortable with this, even if my world's falling apart, Or if it was a grand earth trine, there'd be that sense of practical self-sufficiency. Well, a grand water trine is a sense of emotional self-sufficiency, which on one hand is really cool. On the other hand, it's also in modern psychodynamic thinking, it can be difficult at times because the energy flows so easily. Sometimes it's hard to break old circuits or old patterns. There's just the energy flows. And in fact, it's been said, and I'm not saying this about Robert in particular, but it's been said that people with grand trines are less vulnerable. Robert is a Cancer sun, though. We'll get there in a moment. But a grand trine has the sense of that self-sufficiency makes one less vulnerable. Now, again, that sounds good on paper, except there's no intimacy without vulnerability. And so the problem that some people have with strong grand trines is that sometimes it's hard to let others in, just because, as dependent as I may seem on you, I'll get along without you, kind of a thing. I don't know if this is making any sense at all or not really. It's okay. It's your life, your chart.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I have my life partner with me too, so she can follow.
Yeah.
Some residents.
So now, whether that self-sufficiency is extended beyond one's own feelings or one's own home, the fact is that there's a high level of stability in a grand trine, especially because the planet of stability, Saturn, is harmonizing with the sun, and harmonizing with Neptune. Neptune, the planet of dreams, imagination, illusion, fantasy. Neptune is kind of everything outside of the three-dimensional world, and Saturn is everything inside the three-dimensional world. And often we would say that Saturn and Neptune, which are coming together this summer and next year, which one would imagine will be important for you, because in your chart, there's a natural flow between the imagination and reality, and that Cancer Sun, the caretaker that is nurturing self and others to actually manifest their dreams in some sort of stable manner. That's the way I would throw words around that. And so that's the first thing that I notice. I notice that there's a lot of other, those thick blue lines are all trines. And so there's a lot of flow in your chart in general. But then we look at also that Saturn is not just part of that blue triangle, that blue equilateral triangle. It's also part of this red 90-degree angle triangle, a square triangle. What's the word I'm looking for? A right angle. A right. It's a right triangle. And you can see that Saturn at 17 degrees is not only part of this grand emotional self-stabilizing triangle, but it's also 17 degrees of water Pisces to 17 degrees air Jupiter, down here to this 14-degree Pluto, which is a little, not exactly the same degree, but it's close enough that this is all tied in there and tied into this little thing that looks like the headphones are the nodal axis of the moon, which is the place where the moon's orbit around the Earth intersects the Earth's orbit around the sun. And it's kind of a difficult thing to describe in a sentence or two, but it's less about the three-dimensional things that go on in your life than it is about, maybe it's your purpose, your trajectory, the soul's kind of mission, if there is such a thing, here on Earth in this lifetime. But this right triangle shows a bit more tension or stress. And again, no chart has all of one or all of another, but it's interesting here because the flow between the stability, the authority, Saturn, and the illusions, the dreams, Neptune, and the light vitality of who Robert is, that flows. But the Jupiter and the North Node and the highest point in the chart, the midheaven, all in Gemini, this is a wordy, intellectual, noisier part of Robert that somehow is always at odds, or always there's the, I wouldn't say struggle, but there's always engagement between just the intuitive sense of feeling of knowing what's right, and then whether it's the justification of it, or how do I grow with it, or how do I do something big with this. In a way, when I see Jupiter and Saturn square, and that's a partile square because they're both at 17 degrees. When I see Jupiter and Saturn square, I often think of, and some of you have studied with me, know that it's, to me, this is peristalsis. Peristalsis is the Latin word of how we move things through our esophagus or intestines. It's that expansion, Jupiter, contraction, Saturn, expansion, Jupiter, contraction, Saturn. And when I see Jupiter and Saturn 90 degrees to each other, there's an engagement between how much do I get real? How do I pull in? How much authority do I exert? Because I really want to grow and I want things to expand, but how loose do I get where I then begin to lose my sense of authority or control? And so there's this ongoing dance between expand, contract, between grow and tighten. And it's really the ongoing balance of those in your chart emotionally, not just from the thought process. And your chart is very thought oriented. You got the Jupiter in Gemini, North Node in Gemini. These are words, these are ideas. This is making connections. This is interaction. The Virgo rising. How do I put those words and thoughts into, into effective, efficient use? And then there's the creative part that I think may be a bit more hidden. And there's a bit of a, I would say, a bit of a badass hanging out in how you maybe would want to create or use that kind of on stage or presentation or whatever, because of the Mercury Venus conjunction, that's the artistic expression of words in some ways, is tied to Eris, which is one of these newly discovered Pluto-like planets, and Eris is Mars's sister. And so there's a bit of she's considered to be the sower of discord. And so there's a little bit of that, but it's a little bit more hidden, but there's definitely a flow there also. So that's my nickel shot. Who the fuck are you? Who are you?
Well, you just got my intercom rocker there, I think. So, yes.
What's that?
Wood snake.
Wood snake. It's the wood snake. You're the wood snake.
My year.
What do you do, or what have you done, or what's your?
I've been involved in energy, broadly writ, power plants primarily, electricity, but all over the world.
Okay. The Jupiter in Gemini expansion. I mean, an expansion isn't just like taking a breath in. And I I often think of that Jupiter-Saturn square as alternating current, because in a way it's this, expand, contract. Thank you, Nikola Tesla. It's but there's that. But on some level, I wonder how much of that is either separate from you as emotional nurturer, or how much of that in some way is a systemic, because I started out saying that the Uranus Pluto together as part of your ascendant, there's some social connection, social transformation. Obviously, power is transformation, but in some way, how what you do is actually bringing some sort of emotional stability through the generation of power. I don't know. I mean, on some level, there's a stretch, but there's a conversation there. I think that if we had time, there may be some seeds for how that energy is working, or how you work with that energy on a more global level.
That's interesting. There's a undercurrent there as well about the Vallejo, California connection is because my dad was military. And so we did a lot of moving as a child. And then I thought I wasn't going to try military myself. I didn't want to move so much. I got into power internationally and then moved twice as much.
Got it.
Sort of cultural fluidity and travel and language is a theme that's sort of persisted through there as well, which is a lot of overseas and then kind of back home, and overseas and back home, and to and fro.
So the other thing that I would think about right now is the fact that Saturn in the sky, I said earlier today, was in mid Pisces, and Saturn in your chart at 17 degrees Pisces is mid Pisces. I'm not going to do the math here or drill down on this as I would in a real individual consultation, but looking back about 30 years ago in your life, and so it's 24, that would be 94. That would have been, give or take a year or two, probably more like 92, 93 going into 94. But that would have been the time at which Saturn would have made its first full revolution through your chart. And that's the time when we make major changes. We grow up, we buy homes, sell homes, change jobs, change careers, go back to school, have kids, change, big changes. And as you're coming now into your second Saturn return, which is now and this year and coming up, it's like, this is almost the time where you look back and say, all right, what have I done over the last 30 years? What's worked? What hasn't worked? What do I need to do now to make changes to solidify the third of my life, if you will. And those become, I think, the important issues that are probably, pressing right now. The good news is, the difficult news is that ongoing, how much do I expand? How much do I contract? Which is an ongoing dilemma in your life. The good news, though, is that ultimately it fits into that grand trine that says, ultimately, when you make those decisions, somehow you make them in a way that I think typically brings additional stability. Yes, no, maybe?
30 years ago was a very big move.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Is that all we're getting?
I don't know how vulnerable to be.
No, that's fine.
No, it was a big. I mean, again, my wife and I have been married for longer than that, but that was a very big move to go to the former Soviet Union as the sort of parachuted in guy to go buy assets and start a major restructuring process in a area that had just exited communism and state.
I got it.
So it's a very big move.
Yeah. Well, and again, it sounds like this grand trine that I talked about in some ways has something to do with the creation of stability, maybe not just in your relationship, your home, your family, but as part of how you connect into the outer world. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
All right, let's take a look at, you're excused. You can go back and Amy, do we have an Amy? Amy, can we get you to come up here? You won't be on camera, but that way at least I can feel like I'm talking with you. All right, I'm going to enter in Amy's data. I'm going to set the microphone. I can just do that right here. April 20th. Oh, you're a 420. You are. April 20. You're a 420/80. How cool is that? At is that 6:55? And a Jersey girl.
Trenton.
Yep. I'm a Bronx boy by birth.
Close, but not right.
I'm sorry, what?
I said Philadelphia doesn't agree with that though. Yeah, I'm sure.
All right. And Amy, what's your astrology story?
So my family's from India. We have our birth charts done. I had a birth chart made at birth, literally. We've had different astrologers work with our family at different points. I have a more skeptical outlook towards it, but it's been part of my ether growing up.
And excuse me, I know you're from Trenton. What part of India is your family from?
We're Gujarati, but both my parents were born in Maharashtra, which is
I know. Yeah. I spend a couple months a year in India, mostly in the southwest, Kerala, Goa, Karnataka. Yeah. So just a quick aside on the way in to this, and that is that Indian or Vedic astrology, correctly called Jyotish, is fine. You're fine. I got my eye on you.
She's really the one listening. So.
But a lot of people say that what I'll call Vedic astrology or Jyotish, and what we practice in the United States and most of Western cultures, whether it's Australia or but coming from the Western view, are very different, and your sign would actually change from Taurus to Aries, from one system to another. The difference is that the earth wobbles and that the earth is on this 200, no, it's actually a two, let me get this right. It's just over 20, it's just under 26,000 years for one complete wobble of the earth backwards, which is what changes the ages. Those are 1/12 of that 26,000 years. So we have the age of Pisces or the age of Aquarius or so on. But what that wobble does is it makes a difference between the zodiac that is used in Indian or sidereal star-based astrology, where the planets are mapped against the fixed stars, even though they're not fixed, they appear that way. And they're mapped against the constellations, even though the constellations vary in size, that they're all evened out to 30 degrees each for mathematical convenience. But Aries is about 40 degrees wide and Virgo's only about 20 degrees. No, it's just the other way around. Virgo's about 40 degrees wide and Aries is only about 20 degrees wide. So Vedic astrology that says they use the constellations, they're an aberration of the constellations. That doesn't make it wrong, because Western astrology doesn't use the constellations at all. They use the seasons. So the difference between the two systems is in the labeling of the signs, but they both use the relationships between the planets in the signs, so that if two planets are square, 90 degrees, or conjoined at the same place, doesn't matter what you're mapping it against. And it was the great Western astronomer and astrologer Johannes Kepler who said, we could throw the zodiac away. That's not the real issue. The real issue is the geometry that the planets create. And I kind of agree with that, and I focus on that. But just, just a little aside. A number of years ago, I spoke at a conference in Kolkata, and there was a bit of a disruption between the Western and Eastern views, because an American astrologer kind of was a bit socially inappropriate and basically said, our system's right, yours is wrong, get with the program. And I won an award at that, and I had to give a few words of thanks. And I basically said, the bottom line is that when we look at a chart, we're looking at rocks in space. And space is 99.999% emptiness. And that when you take those out one at a time, all our charts are the same. And it doesn't matter what we use to map those points again. It's we're looking at what makes us different, not what makes us the same. Anyhow, the biggest difference between your chart and the chart that we just looked at is that Robert has a few thick lines. Those are the connections mathematically. And your chart has a lot of noise, a lot of lines, but they're not as thick. Now, there's no good or bad in any of these things. They're just different ways the energy is rattling around the cosmos, and we each have to figure out how do we work with what we got. In your chart, I can see, first of all, that in Western astrology that you have Gemini rising, and that your moon is in Cancer. Taurus sun, in some ways, I would make the assumption that on some level, you can be a lot more interactive and outgoing and what's the word I'm looking for? Facile with having communications with other people than you feel like you want to, because there's a part of you that just wants to just be who you are and not to have to deal with anyone else. And then there's another part of you that just wants to go home, pull the blanket over your head, sip your tea, and not answer the damn phone. That would be the Cancer moon. And it would even be better if there was someone at home for you to take care of while you were at home, or someone to take care of you, because the Cancer moon, and I know because I used to say I have one, I lease one. But I too am the recipient of having a lifetime with a Cancer moon. And there's that sense of, of basically wanting to create safe container around self end around those that are family and or loved ones. And it's because cancer is just Latin for crab. Crabs don't have a backbone, but they have an exoskeleton. And that exoskeleton becomes their protection. It's the biggest difference between Cancer and Capricorn, which are opposite signs, because Capricorn is the backbone. It's the structure. And therefore, Cancers protect themselves by creating boundaries that can be family and homeland and friends and emotional boundaries. And they like to stay safe inside those boundaries with their loved ones or family. Whereas Capricorns have that strong backbone. And instead of mastering the boundaries, they master the outer world. They pick some mountain to climb, so to speak. Cancer says, you climb the mountain, I'll stay at home and sit by the fire and have warm soup. But
my sister's the Capricorn. That's exactly our relationship.
But what's interesting is that your Cancer moon is 90 degrees. See that red line? Some of these lines are kind of buried under other lines. But your Cancer moon is 90 degrees or square to your Mercury, which suggests to me that even though you're kind of a smushy wuss on the inside, that you can talk tough. And sometimes actually your mind and your communication is pushing into new ground while emotionally you're going, why the hell am I having this conversation? I just want to be contained and safe. It's an internal dialogue. Maybe those close to you know, but, and of course, I'm your astrologer now, I know. But, and then on top of that, we have this, kind of this Leo Mars that kind of when, in party mode, everything changes, and I say party mode, it's presentation mode and play, whether it's you playing or whether it's playing with children or working with children or doing creative things. There's a part of you that I think just has a natural affinity, towards that energy that may also be tied up in that nurturing Cancer moon that, interestingly enough, I think sometimes is a pain for you, because it's like, how come I just can't go and have fun like, something like that. And then the other interesting thing two other interesting things that kind of jump off the page at me. One is that, let's go back here, is that Robert had Saturn trine Neptune. Saturn, structure, stability, authority, just working with the dream becoming real, whatever the imagination feeds what it is that you do and what it is that you create. Amy, on the other hand, has Saturn, it's not partile, but it's only 1 degree away, squaring Neptune, which in some ways suggests that there's always engagement between what's real, what's imagination. It's you as the skeptic to those things which are meta to physical. Look, you're a Taurus. You can't kick it. You can't walk around it. You can't see it. You can't bite it. You can't, it's not real. I mean, that's the Taurus is, take care of the 5 senses and everything else just falls into place. But on top of that, Saturn, the planet of make it real, 90 degrees to Neptune, says that there's this ongoing dance between what's real and what's imagination. And again, that's just one of those things that I think you live with forever. It's part of your makeup, part of who you are. And then we should probably also just say a couple of words about the part of you that either is a bit of a rebel or attracts yourself to them. I don't know which that is or how that works, but if it's that you attract yourself to them, it's really because you are that rebel, but just don't express it. But I'm looking at the Mars squaring 90 degrees to Uranus, and this is the kind of occasionally disruptive energy that just explodes one way or another, whether it's you just kind of, losing temper or whatever, or whether it's a relationship where someone is not as reliable as you would expect them to be, because in some way they or the person that you picked that you knew that you could rely on them to escape so you didn't have to? You know, I don't know how many of these things fit on what levels. What's that?
Definitely explosions.
And then there's the other thing that I think is also very important, and that's the fact that when you were born, the sun is trine. You see that fat blue line to Jupiter. Again, doesn't matter what doesn't matter whether you're using, you know, Vedic Indian astrology or Western astrology. Jupiter in Vedic astrology is guru. You know, it's the teacher. And in your chart, guru is harmonized or trine with your sun, which says that you basically have this sense of optimism. Even, I mean, although everyone gets down and everyone goes deep at times, that your Jupiter trining the sun gives you a sense of growth, of hope, of optimism, and probably you can talk a good game around that, which is why people probably come to that Gemini rising that has that ability to do that, and yet they have no idea how you're feeling. You can be feeling like crap and whatever, and you'll just talk around that, and because of that sense of that, you know, make it big. And I think that you have that, just that dance in life with, you know, with turning things into something that is potentially bigger or bigger, better, more. I would imagine that about 7 years ago, your life exploded. And I could be wrong here by 6 months, a year, one way or another. But this is a once in a lifetime when Uranus, which spends about 7 years in a sign, and Uranus is now moving out of Taurus. About 7 years ago, Uranus moved into Taurus. Uranus is the explosion, is the temper, is the need for freedom, and Uranus is unexpected. It's like it changes our direction. Sometimes it's not any fun. It's like being struck by lightning, not fun. But if you survive, it's like, oh my God, this is really exciting. Now I get to create things my way rather than being stuck to what I was stuck to. That making any sense?
Yeah, 7 years ago I got tenure, and I also decided I was sort of done with being an academic, and that propelled us to move back to the Pacific Northwest within a year and a half.
So often Uranus comes with these incredible contradictions, internal and or external. And so, but that's a classic Uranus thing that ultimately I would have imagined opened up a whole new, a whole new part of your life. And as Uranus moves now out of Taurus into Gemini, you have early Gemini rising. And so over the next couple of years, I think that your life is going to go through another notch of, of self-determination, of, self-sovereignty. I don't know what to call that, but then you probably already sense it, but don't know how you're going to pull it off. That's my guess. Feedback for the group. This isn't about you, it's about us.
No, that feels right. I feel like I'm in I've had a lot of big transitions in the last 5 to 6 years that started from that period after I was a professor, got my PhD, was on a specific track.
In what area?
Feminist studies.
Yeah.
So I taught gender, women, and sexuality studies. I still love it, but I knew that there was something different that I needed to be doing.
Again, the Cancer moon and the Aries Mercury of the speaking about it, but that Cancer moon of the nurturing.
Yeah.
There's that whole sense. So thank you.
Thank you.
All right. One more. We'll make this a little bit shorter. I'm sorry, but we just got to do that. Chris, you've been tagged. All right, let's microphone again here, and Chris is June 6/15/75, right? 6/15/75. And that is 7:04 a.m. 7:04 a.m. And that is in Tonasket. Wow. And do you know your chart? Have you ever had your chart done? All right. Well, let's see if we can give this a quick nickel shot. All right. First of all, 7:04 a.m., pretty confident of your time of birth. So I'd say that you seem more serious than you really are. Is that a good one? Good. Do we start out okay there? Why am I saying that? Anyone have a sense? Quick, come on. Saturn. So every day the sun rises, right? Every day the moon rises. Well, the sun doesn't really rise. The earth spins around and it appears on the eastern horizon. Every day, every planet appears on the eastern horizon. We just don't see it. So Chris was born at 7 in the morning. The sun had already come up. We certainly wouldn't have seen Saturn rising at the time of day he was born, because the rising planet, even though we don't see it, determines our interface with the outer world. This is not who Chris is. Chris is a Gemini with Mercury, the planet of Gemini, lined up with his sun. So we know that Chris has got a lot going on mentally. Whether he's sane or not is not the issue on the surface here. Whether he's intelligent or not is not even the issue. We just know there's a lot of noise going on in Chris's head because Mercury at home in Gemini and a Gemini sun basically has a skill, and that skill is connecting the dots. And so Gemini, in fact, Amy's rising sign being Gemini, that's why I said she was probably facile in communication with others, because Geminis can basically go in and out of any situation and make connections. There's a line from an old Ken Kesey, the guy who wrote One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. He wrote a book called The Demon Box and Other Short Stories. And in it, there's a character that he picks up hitchhiking, and he's telling this character, you know, we're going to this bar. He says to the hitchhiker, where are you going? The hitchhiker goes, California in the 60s. He goes, I don't care. Where are you going? He goes, well, I'm going up to this bar up in La Honda outside. You know, he goes, I'll just go with you. And he goes, well, this isn't any bar. He goes, this bar, he goes, everyone who's going to be at this bar, there are PhD nuclear physicists. There's ex-CIA. Everyone here's done their acid. I mean, this is like, I mean, the people you're going to meet here are like really, really special. And the guy says, it's okay, Ken. I can maybe with the best of them. That's a Gemini. It's like, throw me into a situation and I'll find something to say or whatever. But here's the thing, is Chris has Saturn rising, and Saturn is the contractive. Remember that peristalsis, expansion, contraction? So at first glance, Chris looks like, or he appears to be holding energy in, appears to have some emotional, because it's in Cancer. Cancer is about that hard outer shell. And so we feel like when we meet Chris, we feel like we're bumping up against something that's between us and whatever it is, until Chris opens his mouth and starts talking. He's probably really funny and easygoing and loose and whatever, but that's not necessarily how people perceive him. And in fact, that Saturn rising in your chart is 90 degrees or squared to Mars. Saturn is holding back. Saturn is the brake. When you hit the brake on your car, that's Saturn. That's your personality, not who you are, but the mask, how people see you holding back. But your Saturn is 90 degrees in dynamic engagement with Mars, which is the gas pedal. And so you're always trying to figure out gas brake, gas brake, gas brake in life in general. And people think that you hit the brake more than you hit the gas, even though they can see what's behind it. And the beauty here is that Gemini just connects those dots. Hot, cold, yes, no, do it, don't do it, gas brake, accelerate, stop. And it's really interesting, that dynamic of how that plays out. But you as a Gemini sun and Mercury, noisy, intellect, reading, communicating, language, some of those things. Mercury is at home in Gemini, but Mercury is also at home in Virgo. And Chris's moon is in Virgo. So you get this double whammy of Mercury at home in Gemini with your sun, and your moon in Gemini's other sign. And in Virgo, your moon, this is your emotions, this is your insides, this is how you reflect. You're not interested in connecting the dots. In fact, there's a part of you that looks at the part of you that's always moving around and goes, just sit still and stop, because it's not about interacting. It's about figuring out what's useful. And the Gemini part says, I don't give a shit what's useful. If it's data, I think Geminis are the information sluts of the universe. They just, they can't say no to data. If it's out there, it's curiosity. And yet your moon in Virgo, in your gut, you know that you need to figure out what's useful and get rid of that noise. I sometimes think of that Gemini Virgo as AM and FM radio. AM radio is Gemini. It's noisy. It's amplitude modulation. It's talk radio. You change the channel. You listen to the weather. Yeah, he's an asshole. You change it again. FM, you find a frequency. There's so much information coming in on a narrow bandwidth instead of 830 kilohertz. It's 103.7. It's Virgo. It's exact. And people listen to FM radio, they find their station and they just camp out on it because that's their frequency. And so you got both of these things going, and you're always shuffling back and forth between the two of them. At least that's one of the things that I see. Another thing is that your moon in Virgo is partile square Neptune. Partile meaning they're both at 10 degrees. And so here's a little bit of a dance of an engagement with that part of you that wants the narrow, precise, exact, detailed information so you can act on it in the moment. And then the part of you that'll fuzz out and dream and just want to go to the imagination place. And I imagine that there's a story and a dance between those two sides of you that we don't need to know about. No. But I think it's an important piece. And then the last thing I would want to say is that, again, we have a grand trine. It's not exact or partile, but it's Venus in Leo, fire, Neptune in Sagittarius, fire, and Mars and Jupiter in Aries, which is fire. Actually, Mars in Aries is ready, fire, aim. And so we got this little part of you that is feeding that Mars that is like, go for it, do it in the moment, be it, expand it, make it happen. And then the overcompensation on the surface of, all right, I need to learn, I need to be responsible, I need to hold back, I need to respect authority. So, not that one. And I didn't mean that to sound like a gunfire. I meant it to sound like just blowing up, because there's a part of you that I think there's a part of you that needs to express everything in the moment. And then there's a part of you that has learned that when you do that, it doesn't always work out in your favor. Yeah. Anyhow, that and from a timing standpoint, I think I would imagine that last year there probably were changes on the home front on some level, that there may have been some kind of either something coming to culmination or fruition, that maybe the pressure of whether you should do this or not that or whatever is kind of settled down one way or another. That may have been more like a year ago or 6 months to a year ago. And the other thing is, that's what comes to mind. I said this is going to be a shorter one. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah.
First taste of astrology?
Yeah. My dad, he had this down for me. But he had never really walked through it. Yeah, he's really an astrologer.
Got it.
Turned me on to do.
Uh-oh.
His name's Treebeard.
Is what?
Treebeard. An organic farmer. He
Got it. Cool.
My mom was environmentalist.
Got it. All right. Well, that's
Super appreciated.
that's it. And I think we're going to draw this to a close. And I think since we probably overstayed our welcome, which we often do, it would be good to not treat this like a fire drill. By the way, are we offline? Okay, so I'm going to say goodnight to everyone online and say that we will see you next month, and we will be meeting. Good night. It's just riffraff from the audience babbling on about something. All right, hold on. That was Nicholas Polomenakis, freshly back from Australia, basically saying nice things. Anyhow, so this brings it to a close. And if you can help by taking these chairs and putting up against the wall there, that would be a really nice thing. And other than that, I'll see some of you next month. And other than that, I'll see you online. Thank you all for coming out.
And by next month, you mean the 28th?
Yes. Are we no longer broadcasting?
Make sure you slow to open.
Thank you.
I ended the stream.